How long should you brine to get the juiciest, most tender pork chops? 6 hours, 12 hours, or 24 hours? Let's find out as we turn up the tasty. Look, I know why you're here. You saw that picture of those 3 gorgeous pork chops on YouTube and you had to click. And I don't blame you because these look absolutely tremendous. Look at them, they're cut 1.5 inches thick, and I love cooking with thick pork chops. I never cook with thin. They tend to overheat too quickly and it's hard to get them to the right temperature. So today we're gonna be cooking with some thick pork chops and we're gonna try a little experiment. How long should you brine your pork chops to create the optimal results? We've done a few different brine experiments here on this channel. We did one with and without brine. The brine does make a difference. In that video, we only brined for 4 hours. And we want to test now and see, is the impact greater by brining longer? We've done another video with spicy and sweet, and those do have some components, but today we're just gonna isolate the time of the brine. And we're gonna brine one for 24 hours, another one for 12, and another one for 6 hours. But why do we brine to begin with? Well, it creates more tender meat, and that meat is going to be more moist when it comes off the grill. That's very important, especially for a lean cut of meat like a pork chop, because if you overcook it, it's gonna be the equivalent of eating chalk, and that is no bueno. So we're gonna do a very simple brine here. We're gonna start with 1 cup of water, and we're gonna add 1/2 tablespoon of salt to it, right? Now, that's just, we're gonna repeat that process for each chop. If you were gonna brine all these at once, you're gonna need a lot more solution than what I just put together. But from here, we're just gonna whisk it up. You're gonna see some things on the interwebs about boiling your brine, and that might be true for more complicated brines, but for simple brines involving just salt and water, or even if you do add sugar, it really doesn't make any difference to boil. You're gonna get the same results just by doing what I'm doing right here. All right, so now we've shown you how to make the brine. I'm gonna set these to the side for just a moment and get out our chops, which have already been brining. These 2 chops right here have been brining for 24 hours. This chop right here for 12 hours, and this brine right here for 6 hours. Okay, before I cook these, first thing we need to do is we just really need to pat each one of them dry. But as I do that, I want to talk a little bit about what I'm seeing over here with just some color differences, some visual differences, if you will. First of all, this is our 24 hour. And just so I know which one it is when I grill it, I'm gonna take 2 toothpicks. I'm gonna put it right in the tail here, right? It's the old restaurant trick. So you know, diet from regular, but you can really see here, and I'll hold this up, you can really see those fibers are starting, I mean, you can really see the distinction in those fibers. It has a much less pink color than even the one that's been brined for 12 hours. So that will be interesting to see how that plays in the total texture of the cooked chop. Next up, we have our chop right here in the middle, and this one's been going for 12 hours. And you're starting to see too, some of those fibers really come apart, but not to the extent that we're seeing on the 24-hour chop. It is, and it's hard, let me get done drying it off here. Very subtle, but I would say that this is a pinker chop than the one over here for 24 hours. It has a little bit more of that pinkness to it. A little bit more color, let's go ahead. And so I remember which one the 12-hour chop is, that will be 1 toothpick right there. Next, over here, we have the 6-hour chop. You're not seeing the fibers in the same way that you are. You're not really seeing them come apart like you are over here on the 24-hour chop. I don't know if the camera's picking all that up, but you can really see those fibers being in, you can't really see that as much here. This actually has a color that's much closer to the 12-hour chop. So they're totally dried off. I'm not gonna add any additional seasoning from here. We wanna really isolate the impact of the brine itself. Now, I'm gonna get them on the grill. We're gonna get these chops on the grill. We have it set up for 2-zone cooking because these are thick chops. If you try to cook them over direct heat, they may burn on the exterior before they're cooked on the interior. So we're gonna sear them over the direct heat, and then we're gonna move them to the indirect heat, We're gonna turn them about every 2 minutes, flip them after 4, repeat, move it to indirect, and then test the results. First, 6-hour brine right here. 12-hour brine right there. Can you hear that at home? Can you hear that chop sear? That is the sound of tasty. Next is our 24-hour chop right over here. Look guys, live fire cooking is never a perfect process. It's going to be a variable process. It's a little cool out here, and because we had a lot of small pieces of charcoal in here, it just didn't get as hot as I would have liked it right off the bat. So they're taking a little bit longer on the direct side than I anticipated. Right now, we're currently at about 12 minutes. I just checked the internal temperature. We're at 100 degrees Fahrenheit, so we're not overcooking them. It's just taking us a little longer to get that color, that Maillard reaction on the pork chop. So just wanted to check in with you guys, keep it real, and let you know, like, what I'm experiencing here is something you may experience at home. Now, we're not burnt. Take a look at that. It's a good looking chop. We do have some color over there, right? Just not necessarily those beautiful sear mark, right? But that doesn't necessarily make it taste any better. It makes it look prettier though. And good looking food is important because that makes it more appetizing. So just wanted to check in. We're gonna finish this cook until it reaches 140 degrees Fahrenheit. These chops took about 20 minutes from beginning to end to cook. As I mentioned while I was at the grill, I didn't even really need to use the indirect heat because that fire just wasn't as hot as I wanted it. Those types of conditions are always going to exist with live fire cooking. It's a chilly day out there, not as much wind, but we did cook them to an internal temperature of 140 degrees across all 3 chops. And the first thing I notice is sort of the color of the exterior. Over here we have 6 hours, over here we have 12, and over here we have the 24-hour chop, 2 toothpicks, 1 toothpick. That's how I remember. But I guess my first insight here is that for whatever reason, the 6-hour chop seems to have the most, I guess, brilliance to the color of the exterior of the chop, and that sort of decreases across the longer it was brined. Interestingly, we discovered when we dry brined with red peppers, that created a really nice exterior color. So that may be some way to turn up the color scale on a longer brine, or maybe the color is just a function of the heat, and had I had that hotter, I would have gotten more traditional sear marks and gone with the indirect cooking. But I don't think any of it is really going to impact the final flavor. Let's find out. All right, so as I cut through these, I really didn't notice a whole lot of difference in texture of cutting them until I got to the 24-hour chop. That one had like a little bit more crispiness as I cut through the exterior. You could almost hear it like pop a little bit when I cut into it. But we're gonna start over here with the 6-hour brine. It's a good chop. It's got that edge-to-edge saltiness that we get anytime we brine. Really standard for a brine chop. Tender and moist, as you can see, all the juice run out on the board across all 3 chops. Now, as I cut into it, don't know why, it almost seemed like this chop had a little bit more moisture in it. Cleanse the palate. Let's see if looks hold up to taste on the 12-hour brine. No question, that is a more tender chop. That is more tender. One of my favorite parts of this pork chop is this little fat cap out here. It's one of my favorite pieces of fat on any cut of meat. As you hear me say all the time, the fat is where it's at. That's where beef meat in general gets a lot of its flavor. And this particular pork fat from the pork loin has a really buttery, rich umami flavor that melts in your mouth. That's great. Great texture on that. Clearly juicier and clearly more tender than the 6-hour brine. What's interesting is when we did our experiment with a 4-hour brine versus no brine, the impact there with the brine chop was only marginally noticeable. I would say it did have an impact, but not a tremendous impact. I think now tasting this 12-hour chop, I can taste the difference. Now on to the 24. It's a little saltier. That's the first thing that I noticed. This chop over here, a little saltier. I'm not getting much difference in the way of tenderness. Let's see if I can find a fat cap piece, just kind of keep it even. Nope. Tenderness, I don't really feel like it's, I don't even necessarily feel like it's as tender. It's about even. Not much though, and I just find this to be a much saltier bite. Let me try another piece here with that fat cap. And they all came off the same temperature, so this is really interesting. I think it's tender, and the salt is more subtle. I don't need to go back to this one, because I knew that this one already, right off the bat, was better. So if I had to do this again, I don't think I'd go 24 hours. I think probably somewhere 12 hours, give or take a few, is probably gonna be your sweet spot. What have you guys found at home? I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments below. How long do you brine your chops? Do you add stuff to it? Like brown sugar, like pepper, like onions, apple cider. Let us know what works for you. We love to hear from people all across the country to see how you are turning up the tasty right at home. I have some eating to do. I'll see you guys next time.